Hello, and welcome to part three of influencer marketing. Today, we are going to move along off of the influencer bubble and move ahead to what makes a good influencer. So, this is going to look strictly from a branding perspective, from a brand company perspective that wants to work with an influencer. The first two videos in this series, I largely went back and forth between the influencer's perspective and the business's perspective. So let's start first. Again, think of it from the business side. The first thing when you're considering an influencer, you want to do some influencer marketing, is you want to look at their numbers, the analytics that come with their account, what makes them an influencer. Um, I define reach here. It's the number of people that an influencer can deliver a message to. That is a unique number. That is not the same as impressions. And when influencers share with you what their numbers are, you want to make sure that you are clearly understanding what it is that they're telling you. Impressions, as you likely know by now, is the total number of times a piece of content or profile is viewed. Reach is how many different people see it. So if you and I both look at an influencer's profile, that has a reach of 2. If I look at it 5 times and you look at it once, that reach is still 2, but the impressions is 6. Um, that's something that is a lot of times people confuse those two. Um, that's just kind of the first thing to look at. But in reality, um, in reach and followers, by the way, do not equal. Reach is usually going to be the possible reach is a lot larger than their number of followers. Um, but a lot of times, what they will start with, the easiest number to sell, is the number of followers that they have. That has widely been regarded as like the number one sense of worth for influencers, for better or worse. And we are at a point now where the more followers an influencer has, usually the more expensive it gets to work with them. But in reality, they really don't need to have millions of followers to be an effective influencer for your brand. The reality is that, hey, reach and follower count, those alone are not the requirements necessary to be a successful influencer for a brand. Um, a lot of times, the fewer followers you have, the more engaged that they are, and the higher your engagement rates will be. Usually, that also means that there's a niche audience that you've tapped into. The example from earlier that I used was Cristiano Ronaldo, the largest Instagram following online. Another example is Selena Gomez. She was the first influencer to hit 100 million followers. Both of them have massive appeal to people around the world in all different industries, all different niches, all different age groups. That's great, but that's like ranking first for the word Detroit on a search engine. People search for Detroit, you have no idea what they're looking for. Are they looking for instructions on how to get there, directions? Are they looking for history? Are they looking for something about the automotive industry? Are they looking for something about a person? Are they looking for a road that might not even be in Detroit? There's so many different reasons, so many different intent purposes that people would search that for. And the same applies to influencers. The reason that people follow these influencers are numerous. There are dozens of reasons to follow people with hundreds of millions of followers on Instagram. However, as you look at a smaller following, you get influencers with these smaller numbers. The reasons that people follow them and the point of being engaged with them, like having an audience, that audience becomes a little bit more defined. And what they're there for and what their interests are become a little bit more specific. So here are the 5 levels of influencers based on follower numbers. If you have more than 1,000 followers, you could be a nano influencer. Um, I would never test anybody on what the different levels are and what their numbers are, because to be honest, these numbers change all the time. I have seen all sorts of different things. Really, the big 3 to know. There are nano influencers. These are the smallest, very, very, very specific niche kind of purpose to follow them. It's really just their close knit followers, family, friends. The micro influencers, the step above nano influencers, it's typically around 10,000 followers. It's smaller reach, but than these bigger ones, but they have again high levels of engagement, and they usually are really good at having that back and forth conversation with their followers. Mid tier is above that. That's a pretty wide range, 50,000 to 500,000. Um, they're kind of like looked at from an industry standpoint as an expert. Again, a niche, but maybe not that niche. Macro, that's at half mil to 1 mil followers. I would argue this is where the most follower, where this is like your next generation of influencers or up and comers are. On TikTok, you see a lot of people with followers in between those two numbers, and this is an extensive reach. But um, generally, a macro influencer, these are people that are really in it for the money. They have really turned this into a business opportunity. Nano and micro influencers, these sure, like they want to be influencers. You can make money with them, or they can make money. They monetize and all that stuff, but they're not. It's not like I wouldn't call these people like, okay, this is what they do every day, all day. Once you get to macro and above, this is when influencers like this is their job. They live to do this. Now, I would also say macro influencers are where people are no longer representing themselves, where they usually work with a company or a manager of some sort. I saw something years ago, and again, I am not the influencer, so I wouldn't know. But if you're a brand, and you start working with somebody that has over a 500,000 followers, and say you just work directly with them, that's a great opportunity because you know that they don't realize yet that they can be monetized to a bigger extent. I don't want to say it's like taking advantage of them, but in reality, it is. Where these people don't really understand how impactful what they say, how impactful that is. But they're on the way up. Then you have mega influencers. This is everybody at 1 million above. There's something like 70,000 TikTok accounts with 1 million followers or more. It's outrageous how many there are. And again, not everybody with 1 million followers is an influencer. Maybe they don't want to be an influencer. Maybe that's not their thing. A lot of athletes, not necessarily influencers. The one I like to talk about, other than Cristiano Ronaldo, is LeBron James. You don't just reach out to LeBron James on Instagram and say, "Hey, you want to do this?" All of the sponsored stuff he does are through endorsements. They're usually Nike. They're usually these companies that he has multi-million dollar brand endorsements with and has had those endorsements for years. The guy has been the face of basketball for 20 plus years as a result, and really the face of sports, I would argue, in America since I was a teenager. And working with somebody like that, he doesn't have the following of Ronaldo or even some of these, like Mr. Beast, of course. He has the most followers in the world. But a lot of people, they just aren't influencers first and foremost. Now, again, these are just follower numbers. I could go all day, talk all day about how following somebody is no longer the number one point of social media and how the algorithm has made it so a follow no longer carries the same weight that it once did. However, I'm going to skip over all that and just move on to the next thing here. Um, if we look at engagement rate for all these follower numbers, follower levels, as you get higher level of as a brand and you're looking at these different levels of followers, um, the phenomenon that occurs is you see a lower and lower average engagement rate. On average, I mean, nano influencers have about a 4.5% engagement rate, which is pretty good. I always like to compare this to, okay, like my number one channel that I use on LinkedIn with brands, I get an average engagement rate of about 5.5 to 10. So you're looking at nano influencers where also, I would argue one engagement by a follower of a nano influencer is going to go further than any engagement with a brand account and any engagement by these other accounts. Also, you have micro. By the way, you'll notice there's only four here. It's because mid tier and micro, you start seeing drop offs, but macro and mega are kind of all the same. Not all the same, they vary. But macro influencers, you start to see a drop, and you'll see each level, it cuts in half. But I will say that mid tier, which is, I believe, around 50,000 people following, you're under 2%. And so it's pretty low, but you see a larger reach, a larger number of people that are seeing it, not as niche, not as targeted. But again, if you are going to work with a mega influencer, at that point, you're just playing the numbers game. You just want the quantity, which is fine. If it's a brand awareness play, great. But if you're looking for actual conversions, things that activities that you want an influencer to lead to dollars, that is going to be something where you want to look at people maybe with a smaller following. All right. Now, I mentioned this briefly earlier, but credibility is probably the number one thing that makes a good influencer. And this is not something you can necessarily measure, but it's a level of trust provided by the followers that's really based on the influencer's perceived knowledge or expertise. I would argue this is much more important than reach, but again, you can't really measure this. If you could, we would use this first and foremost. But also, credibility is based on where they are in terms of the industry. And this is where I'm going to just be honest and say if you're in the B2B space, working with influencers, it is possible. There are strategies. You can do it. But unless you are really good and you are very specific and you know the influencers that you want to work with, you're facing an uphill battle. You look at this table here, you don't even need to look at the top row in terms of all these different demographics, but look at all the categories. Everything here is B2C. Everything is direct to consumer. Food and drink, think like especially like not necessarily alcohol anymore, not beer, but more of these alternative drinks. Influencers will try like these mocktails that are out there or certain energy drinks. Sometimes it's even just like bottled water. You see a lot more of an influencer push on types of drinks that people don't even know exist. That is really a big driver. Two, you have beauty, and this is largely driven by BeauTube, where a lot of women are looking to see what a new brand of makeup looks when it's actually applied to somebody. Maybe not themselves, but somebody that they follow online and whose opinion they trust. Then you have fashion. Obviously, it's clothes. Again, this is something where, similar to the beauty industry, you can see it better and it's easier to sell. It's easier to sell people when it's on somebody. Just seeing an outfit on a hanger doesn't really have the same appeal as if you see somebody modeling it off with photos. A couple other categories you see: gaming, people that are playing different types of games and can share it. When you look at these, a commonality between all these top categories is they are influencers make them experiences. And when you make a product or a service an experience, it intrinsically becomes a little bit more attractive. It no longer becomes transactional. It now becomes a way of life. And that's what they're trying to do here. The relevance, though, I'm talking strictly about the products. If your brand operates in any of the products and any of the industries that are listed here, there's a good bet that you could work with influencers in your niche to really help improve sales. The problem is that most of us don't work in these industries. And I think that's where a lot of us are left wondering, how do I make influencer marketing work for me? Because if you're not in one of the 7 or 8 categories that are here, you're really out of luck. And also, a lot of these categories have very thin margins. You're looking at narrow profit margins where the cost of creating these products is fairly high. Somebody like me who works in consulting, I have massive profit margins. But for me, it doesn't really make sense to work with influencers unless it's very, very, very specific and with a very specific following. All right, last topic here on this video is, hey, activity and engagement is really critical for an influencer to succeed. That means communicating with followers. Not it shouldn't just be a one to many communication strategy. There needs to be some back and forth. Um, it means posting regularly, responding to comments, sharing engaging content, but then also being transparent, being adaptable to changes. Somebody who can do things on the fly, who can improvise. When everything is scripted, it feels like you're watching a TV show or you're working with a celebrity who is behind all these layers of bureaucracy and lawyers and talent management teams. Whereas in reality, you as a brand should want to work with an influencer who is authentic, who is honest, and somebody who can work with different groups. That's going to really help your brand in terms of reaching a better audience, and then also helping your brand awareness. You don't want to be with somebody you don't want to work with an influencer who is stiff and just, not that doesn't give off that warm, authentic feeling. All right, well, we'll stop there. This is probably the longest video yet, but there is one more video to do. We're going to look at the benefits of influencer marketing and look more at the compensation of it. So stay tuned. We have one more to go.